What do you all think? So you have yes, B, yes, but we have created a separate C, process for people fleeing domestic violence, including separate access points. No, it's been challenging to involve and integrate DV providers. And D, no, we're still planning and designing our CES and aren't there yet. Well, the answer is B, yes. We have created a separate CE process for people fleeing domestic violence, including a separate access points, and we will go into that a little bit more in detail. Can everybody hear clearly?
I only just now got audio.
Okay, thank you. And who was that?
Becky at Salvation Army.
Okay, thank you, Becky. Can everybody else hear pretty clearly?
This is Teresa Hurtado with Family Crisis Center. I'm just able to hear as well.
Okay, thank you.
This is Marissa with Hannah's House. I can hear you now.
Thank you.
This is Clyde Smith with Family Services. I just was able to hear now as well.
Okay, thank you. We might have had some technical difficulties in the beginning. So we'll just keep going with the webinar. In integrating our domestic violence clients into our CES, what does that model look like? Our coordinated entry system is designed as a hybrid using an intake structure that is centralized and decentralized. An intake model design is selected based on the county's unique characteristics and populations. It seeks to serve through coordinated entry. Now I'm going to turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you. So we're going to talk a bit about safe entry into services and housing. The goal of a safe entry into services is for individuals and families presenting to the Homeless and Victim Services System to have full and complete access to the housing and service resources available through both systems. HUD encourages COCs to work with victim service providers within the COC's geographic area to establish client-driven, trauma-informed, and culturally relevant assessment and screening tools, as well as referral policies and procedures to ensure that the coordinated entry process addresses the physical and emotional safety and privacy and confidentiality needs of participants. This includes separate access points, if necessary and appropriate, and access to all available and appropriate housing options and related supportive services, regardless of whether the individual or family presents for intake at a victim services access point or at a more general access point. The safe entry includes equal access to homeless services and housing programs. One promising practice is to use a virtual access point that includes an internet and phone-based system, such as 211. This can be quickly accessed from any location where the household is seeking assistance and feels safe. The safe entry into the KTCOC coordinated entry is as follows. Client is assessed. If necessary, the service provider or housing navigator can refer the client to other appropriate agencies that can meet their specific need. Client is entered into HMIS if they meet the requirement. And so that's just for general clients who are coming into the system. For domestic violence clients, there is a modification that is safe and confidential. For clients who are at a domestic violence shelter, the DV shelter staff can conduct an assessment if the client does not have resources to exit on their own or wishes to access our COC or ESG funded housing. The DV shelter staff will conduct an assessment in the DV HMIS with their full name and all of their data. that domestic violence HMIS system is not able to be accessed by any other provider in the community. It is our comparable database. Once that is done, the client is then entered into the general HMIS that all staff at our service providers have access to. The difference is that that client is entered as an anonymous client. The ID for that client in the DV database is entered into the regular database. So for example, the client would be entered as anonymous, and the client ID would be part of their last name. And in their housing note, it would note that this client can be accessed, the client information can be accessed in the DV database. This is an alternative to the by name list, but it allows for domestic violence clients to have the same access to all of our housing resources as any other client. The access, again, to the DV client's information is limited only to DV service providers and HMIS staff. Households at DV shelters have access to housing and service resources throughout the system. This helps create collaborative relationships between all homeless providers. So safety planning with survivors at entry points. Service providers should be prepared to consider and discuss safety as it revolves around survivors' participation in the entry and service matching process. Transparency around data or what must be collected to determine eligibility is important. All households, regardless of their DV status, have the right to refuse or share their information among providers within the COC. In fact, all service providers are prohibited from denying assistance to program applicants and program participants if they refuse to permit the provider to share their information with other providers. However, some information may be required by the project or public or private funders to determine eligibility for housing or services or to assess needed services, so it must be collected. In cases where a client does not consent to having their information shared, the information must still be collected by the service providers to determine whether the family or individual is eligible, but it must not be shared via the HMIS if the program participant objects. For instance, if a provider needs to verify the presence of a disability in the process of determining eligibility for PSH or permanent supportive housing, the information itself must be collected but not shared via HMIS. The way to do that in our HMIS could be that you put the information in and you restrict it to organization, or if the client insists that that information should not go in and they want to answer as don't know or refused, then you would need to document that in your case file. When assessing a domestic violence client, we want to make sure that we are ensuring their safety before we proceed with any other assessment processes. Domestic violence is often very traumatic for households, including children exposed to domestic violence. It is necessary that the coordinated entry processes be designed to prevent further trauma and to provide households with control over the process and referrals. Trauma-informed practices that are sensitive to the lived experience of all people presenting for services need to be incorporated into every aspect of the coordinated entry process. The assessment tool and process should not re-traumatize the individual or family, must inform the person up front about how the information will be used, and must allow them the option to refuse to answer questions or choose not to disclose personal information. So some questions that you might want to ask a person if you are aware in advance that they are a victim of domestic violence. For example, if you're conducting street outreach or meeting somebody for the first time, you can ask questions like, is our location safe for you? Are you safe to sit down and talk for a while? Is there someone here today who makes you feel unsafe? Or when we are finished talking today, can you leave safely? If you get a no to any of those questions, we'll be talking about specific protocols later in the webinar. Right now, I'm going to turn it over to Leticia to talk a bit about trauma-informed processes when you are engaging with people experiencing domestic violence.
Trauma impacts how people access services. People who have experienced ongoing trauma may view the world and other people as unsafe. Those who have repeatedly been hurt by others may come to believe that people cannot be trusted. This lack of trust and need to be constantly on guard for danger makes it difficult for families to ask for help, trust providers, or even form relationships. So while assessing a DV client and other clients, try to consider how people with trauma history may experience intake and the whole assessment process. For the client, it might seem rushed, intrusive, and it could also trigger trauma reactions. It may be best to establish rapport even before beginning an assessment. And you may need to bring a support person to help the client through that, through the assessment. You can also allow for pauses, a second appointment also, which can also create rapport. And then always ensure privacy when discussing current housing situations and reasons for seeking help. Help establish open exchange by listing some common reasons for seeking help. Some might include maybe they left or need to leave a dangerous person in your household, in their household or neighborhood, or the current housing is unsafe because someone is stalking them or calling them. And then assess imminence of danger. Support the DV client in providing you with more information. So does the client pose a current threat? Does the client have a safe place to stay at the moment? If danger is imminent and the DV client is without options, immediate referral to DV shelter or other temporary safe housing may be necessary. Make sure to honor the client's preferences. The client's preferences or ideas may be different from what you recommend or suggest. You can connect them to community resources that specialize in domestic violence. And if you're looking into housing for client, the safety of the location is also important. So client's idea, of course, may be different. And also their loss of decision or power is going to be affected while you're assessing the person. So it's always important to honor their preferences. And here are some local emergency shelters and also support. And I'm sure many of you are aware of these places. So Central California Family Crisis Center, CCFCC, which is located in Porterville, and they provide emergency and transitional shelter to homeless and battered women and children. Supportive services are also provided and include case management, advocacy, accompaniment, and transportation. The other support services, Family Services of Tulare County. They also have Karen's House, and they also have a 24-hour hotline. And then King's Community Action Organization, KCAO. They have a 24-hour hotline that provides support and guidance for callers experiencing a domestic violence or sexual assault crisis, and the Barbara Seville Shelter, which is for men, women, and children seeking refuge from domestic violence.
So at this time, we'd like to open it up for any questions or concerns that you may have as you are engaging with people experiencing or fleeing from domestic violence in the community as they seek to access housing. Is there anyone that is struggling with how to handle these situations or how to ensure safe access to assistance? Okay, great. I know we have a lot of DV providers on the line, and I want to make sure that you all feel comfortable about how to offer housing assistance or access to our housing priority list to those clients who are interested in it. So we want to leave you all with a couple of resources and just reiterate our local process, which of course is a bit of a hybrid in general, because we have a centralized coordinated entry, and we also have decentralized through 211 or other access points. But if you have folks who are fleeing domestic violence that you are encountering either at your agency and you're not a domestic violence service provider, you do want to ensure that you are assessing their current situation and whether or not they are safe. We encourage you to use the questions that we have talked about in this presentation. If the client attempting to access services is not safe, of course, we would ask that you connect them to one of our 3 shelter providers that we have on the screen. But also our law enforcement providers have a strong connection with these service providers and would be willing to transport somebody if need be. So please do follow that process. However, if somebody who is fleeing domestic violence wants to go into our regular coordinated entry, they have that choice. Again, client choice is paramount in our process. And then for our DV providers, if you have a client who is interested in accessing housing, you're going to do their VI SPDAT, enter them into the comparable database, and then you're going to enter them in as an anonymous client into the regular HMIS. If you have any concerns with how that process works or how to actually enter those pieces in, please let us know. We'd be happy to coordinate a training on that so that we ensure that every person in our community who is in need of housing assistance has access to it. We thank you for joining us today. And the final resources that we'd like to share are through the HUD Exchange. We have some information through the HUD COC NOFA, through eSNAPs, and then we will also be sending out a fantastic link to the NASH website, which many of you may already be familiar with, but they have some amazing trauma-informed toolkits and other resources for housing providers. With that being said, we wish you a great rest of the day, and we will be chatting with you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.